When they talked about their playing days, it was almost as if it was Dorothy talking about the good times she had in the land of Oz. And it was a rarefied moment in time that they got to be a part of. And so many of these girls were, they were farm girls. And this was just it was an anomaly, especially back in the 40s. Baseball has always been seen as this masculine fraternity. So for them to get an opportunity to have this league, not just for 1 year, but for almost 12 years, was pretty remarkable.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
Yes, the dulcet tones of Corey Coates, announcing yet another fun-filled and exciting episode of Good Seats Still Available, that curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thank you for joining us. If it's your first time here, thank you tremendously for navigating the wilds of podcast land and finding us and downloading us and putting us into your earbuds. We appreciate all the effort. And if you're a return visitor, well, we appreciate your process of doing so that first time and coming back on a regular basis. Either way, however you got here, we hope not to disappoint, and I don't think we will. Today's episode's an interesting and fun one, as we try to make them to be. And the topic is baseball, but a particular slice of baseball, and that is women and baseball. How that sort of tenuous mix of the pursuit of women playing baseball on an amateur, but in particular for our conversation on a professional basis, which is a tortuous history at that. And our guest today is our convenient excuse to get into the professional endeavors that women have pursued to play baseball in the United States. And his name is Jon Leonoudakis, and he is the creator, the director, the producer of a whole bunch of things, but in particular, a web television series called The Sweet Spot, which is a treasury of baseball stories. It's a streaming TV channel. It is available on Roku, Vimeo On Demand, and most interestingly and probably most broadly on Amazon Prime. So if you're an Amazon Prime member, you can find The Sweet Spot, a treasury of baseball stories out there now. And season 3, which is the current season, just launched, is the focus of our conversation. That season is called Shutout, the battle American women wage to play baseball. And there's a particular chapter in this season, which is devoted to the professional exploits of women and baseball in the United States. And it is of course, our convenient excuse to go deeper into some of those leagues and attempts. And that is a focus of what we do here on this little podcast. And I think it's probably the most famous of those is the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League that ran from 1943 to 1954. Made famous, of course, by the 1994 film A League of Their Own with Rosie O'Donnell and Tom Hanks and Madonna and others. And that actually led to not only a rediscovery, I guess, of the fact that women in baseball actually existed as a professional thing back in the day, but also the launch of an actual barnstorming team called the Colorado Silver Bullets from 1994 to 1997. That then also begat an actual second shot at an actual league in 1997 called Ladies League Baseball, and then for a shorter period of time the following year, 1998, called the Ladies Professional Baseball League. We're going to talk about all of those particular areas and topics and nooks and crannies with our guest, Jon Leonoudakis, in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned. I think you're going to find it very interesting, as I did. Promotionally, we want to, of course, remind you that our friends at Audible are our esteemed partners and sponsors, and we, of course, thank them profusely for sticking with us for our first 6 or 7 months of existence. And we encourage you, of course, to give Audible a try, as many of our listeners have. And, of course, it's all about audiobooks, and there are 180,000 plus titles of said audiobooks to be found on the Audible service. If you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats, you will enjoy one of those titles for free on us, gratis, as well as experience a 30-day trial of the Audible service by doing so. That's audibletrial.com/goodseats for your free audiobook download of, like I said, over 180,000 plus titles. If you can't find one in that gigantic roster of availability, well, I don't know what planet you're on, but you got to find something there. And again, 30 days of free trial, and you can cancel at any time. I need to underline that. And it's a good deal all around. Again, it's audibletrial.com/goodseats for your free 30-day trial of the Audible audiobook service, as well as your free audiobook download for you to listen to and hopefully enjoy. Thank you, Audible, and thank you for giving it a try. We appreciate it. All right, let's not waste any more time. Let's get to our very intriguing conversation with filmmaker Jon Leonoudakis about the various professional baseball exploits of women in the United States, here coming up on this big show. Maybe we can start at the start. Give us and our audience a bit of a background about you and how you not only came across this topic for season 3, but the whole series in general, as well as your background as a pro. I'm assuming that you've got some expertise and exposure to television production and the like.
That's right. Well, I'll start as a kid. I grew up in San Francisco in the 1960s. I was born in 1958. And my brothers introduced me to the wonders of baseball cards, which became my passport into the country of baseball. And our local team was the Giants, and we loved Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, and Juan Marichal, and the rest of them. And there were 3 things that were constants in my childhood, and that was going to the movies, watching television, reading comic books, and playing with my baseball cards. That's 4 things. But I loved baseball. I played it every day, seemingly, as a kid. I played Little League baseball. My next-door neighbor, Sharon Mullins, her father had been drafted by the Yankees right before World War II. So some of the kids in that family had some athletic skills. And Sharon was the only girl who played with us, and she was good. She could hit, throw, run, catch. She was one of the gang. And we played every day, seemingly, as kids. And then sometime around the 7th grade, she kind of vanished off the diamond. And that always kind of stuck with me. I wondered what happened. But I continued my love of baseball and following it on through high school. I wasn't good enough to make my high school baseball team. I think I actually had the ability, but I lacked the confidence. So I switched over to playing sandlot baseball in high school, and then playing a lot of softball, which I continue to do today. But when I left high school and started college, my major was fine and communication arts, and my focus was on motion picture and television production. So I essentially went to film school at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. I moved from San Francisco to LA in '76, and I've been here ever since. My love for the game has always been very strong for me. And in 1989, the Giants finally made it back to the World Series after the last time they had been was about 1962, I believe, when they lost in 7 games to the Yankees. And I, as a youth, actually worked at Candlestick Park from 1970 to 75 in the parking lots. My family ran a parking concession out there, and that's where the kids in the family went to go to learn about business and to get off the streets and keep us out of trouble. And that just deepened my love for the Giants and baseball. And so when they went to the World Series in '89, my brother was a season ticket holder and invited me to go to Game 3 with him. Well, this was a big moment. My first World Series game, I borrowed my dad's VHS camcorder, and I brought my 35 millimeter SLR with about 10,000 rolls of film to capture the experience. And we shot a bunch of stuff out in the parking lot, interviewed some people, just sort of taking it all in. And we got inside to the ballpark. It was about 40 minutes before the game was going to start, which I believe first pitch was scheduled for 5:35. I went to go get a hot dog, and we had great seats right off of third base, between third base and left field, right on the field level. I went in to get in line to get a hot dog, and at 5:04 p.m., a 6.9 earthquake erupted, which, of course, ended the game. Because there was no power in the stadium. I stayed the intervening 10 days in San Francisco because I wasn't going to get gypped out of my only chance to go to a World Series game. But I had shot all this footage, and I continued to shoot in the intervening 10 days in and around San Francisco. And then when I went back, I was able to kind of be able to tell this story in 3 acts. And I had all that footage, and I kind of didn't do anything with it for a long time until as my career began to progress in the film industry and in the entertainment business in Los Angeles. Right around 2009, I sort of had that midlife crisis moment where you look in the mirror and you say, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And I'd had a very successful career up to that point, producing TV commercials. I was producing theme park attractions for Walt Disney Imagineering for all of their parks and cruise ships and so forth around the world. But I had worked on a documentary called The Wrecking Crew, which has been a very successful music documentary that my friend Denny Tedesco produced and directed.
Yes, I have seen it, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. But Denny was one of my good friends. We went to college together, and we'd actually done a documentary about his father, Tommy, who was in all likelihood the world's most recorded guitarist in the history of the record business. We made a little documentary about him in the early 1980s. It got shown on our local PBS station, and that was about it. Then we did a jazz music video for him in 1988. And then in 96, Denny told me, hey, I want to make this film about my dad and the people that were all these studio musicians that were the studio band for all these big hit records that came out of Los Angeles between 1958 and 1962, La Bamba being the first of them, all the way going through working with the Carpenters and the Captain and Tennille. And in between that, they were the studio band for the Beach Boys, Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, Frank and Nancy Sinatra, Gary Lewis and the Playboys, the Mamas and the Papas. It was like the Dead Sea Scrolls of 20th century music. And it was all the music I grew up listening to. And I'm also a guitar player, and these people were sort of my heroes. So I worked on that project with him for about 5 years. And when the filmmaking bug had sort of bitten me, and I said, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? And I said, I'd like to make films about baseball. I know a lot about it. I love baseball. And in 2002, I had really gotten immersed into a whole other side of the game, really what I would consider the human side of baseball, by becoming a member of the Baseball Reliquary, which is kind of a left coast version of Cooperstown. It's got its own academic bent. It's iconoclastic. It's got an irreverent side to it, and they really honor and acknowledge people from all walks of life who have impacted the landscape of our national pastime. And I saw an article in the newspaper saying there's going to be this Hall of Fame event in Pasadena, and they were inducting Shoeless Joe Jackson, Minnie Minoso, and Mark the Bird Fidrich. I said, wow. And it was free. I said, how can I miss this? So I went up there, and at the time I was really disenchanted with baseball, with all of the cheating and the corporatization of the game. All the fun seemed to have been squished out of it. And I went to this event. Minnie Minoso was there, and it was like going to a religious revival tent meeting. I came out of there completely re-energized. I had found my tribe, and it kept me excited and interested in baseball, and not just in contemporary baseball, but baseball history. I'd lived long enough to follow the game since the 60s onward. And so I decided I would like to make films about baseball, but look at them from the human side of the game, because I think that's something that appeals to anyone. People love a good story, and that narrative is really at the heart. This is really the heart and soul of baseball. So one of the first things I did was to make a documentary about the Baseball Reliquary, and it was called Not Exactly Cooperstown, and it's become kind of a cult favorite amongst people in the baseball subculture. And the second piece I did was I actually went ahead and decided to do a documentary about my experience at the '89 World Series, and that's called The Day the World Series Stopped, not to be confused with the ESPN version for their 30 for 30 series called The Day the Series Stopped. And then from there, I produced and directed a documentary about one of the most prolific writers of the 20th century, who was also a sports writer, and his name is Arnold Haino, who wrote one of the iconic baseball books, A Day in the Bleachers. And I remember getting Arnold's biography of Willie Mays when I was 10 years old. And I distinctly remember the name of the man who wrote that book, little knowing that about 50 years later I would make a film about him. And that film is a favorite of mine because Arnold is not only a terrific writer, who met Babe Ruth and saw Babe Ruth play, and actually had a ticket and saw the Don Larson's perfect game. But he's become a friend. I learned a lot about writing from Arnold, and he's also a social activist who's done some wonderful things for minorities as well as the environment. So that piece came along, and I was looking to do something a little bit different in my documentary work. I wanted to tell more stories over a shorter period of time to sort of amortize my costs over the long haul. And one of my college friends, Kelly Holtzclaw, and I would get together for lunch every year, and we'd catch up on what our projects were. And he says, you keep telling me these baseball stories and these films you're making. He says, I don't even like baseball, but these stories are fascinating. Have you ever thought of starting a streaming television channel featuring these baseball stories? I said, no, but there's a hell of an idea. And that's really what got me started with The Sweet Spot. And, we began our first season, started airing on Amazon and Roku and Vimeo on demand last December and this past January. But to answer your question about the women in baseball story and why we're addressing it here in The Sweet Spot, as a filmmaker, you're always looking for good stories. And I had heard of an organization in the Los Angeles area called Baseball for All, and it was run by Justine Siegel, who's a bit of a baseball pioneer in her own right. She's the first woman to pitch batting practice to a Major League Baseball team, which was the Cleveland Indians in 2011. And then I believe in the fall of 2015, she's the first woman to be hired to be a coach for a Major League Baseball team. And she was a pitching coach for the Oakland A's fall ball team in 2015. But she had experienced her own gender discrimination when she went from Little League and wanted to play high school baseball. And the coach there said, we don't want girls on this team. Boys play baseball and girls play softball. And she got into a position ultimately, she said, I want to be in a position where I can create opportunities for girls to coach, play, and umpire baseball at any level. And she's done a tremendous job. This is a grassroots level type of thing that she's gotten going, and it's grown to some wonderful proportions at this point. But I'd heard about them, and I heard that they were going to be having sort of an girls all-star team baseball tournament with girls from the Southern California area against girls from Australia. Australia is very popular. Baseball is very popular in Australia, and they've long had a girls team there called the Aussie Hearts. So I asked Justine, I'd like to come down and shoot the game and document the tournament. And I covered it for a couple of days, and I was bowled over by the experience. It was maybe the purest baseball experience I've ever seen or been a part of. These girls, they were between the ages of, I would say, 13 and 16. And I've just never seen kids play with that kind of love and passion, the willingness to learn, the sportsmanship, the camaraderie between the girls on both teams, because they all stayed in the same hotel together and they sort of bonded on and off the field. And it just captured my imagination. And then I began hearing stories of the kinds of gender discrimination these girls were going through, even in this, so-called enlightened age that we live in. And it was kind of like unpeeling an onion. The stories took me deeper and deeper and deeper into the challenges American girls and women have faced. I had no idea, for example, that American girls weren't allowed to play Little League Baseball until 1974. And that was only because they were sued. Little League did not allow girls to play baseball, and they found out that there was a girl pitching for a team called the Hoboken Democrats in New Jersey. She was very good, and her name was Maria Pepe. And one of the coaches of an opposing team ratted her out and told the central office about it. And the Little League main office told the Hoboken team, said, "You either kick that girl off the team, or we're revoking your charter." And so, they went ahead and did this, and that whole story in and of itself is really something. But so that was kind of a shocker. I had stopped playing Little League Baseball in '72, and of course, there were no girls playing in the Catholic Youth Organization when I was playing. But I wasn't aware of that, and of course, everyone's very familiar with the film A League of Their Own, which was really the only major sort of substantive professional women's baseball league that we've had in this country.
Well, let's get into that a little bit, because
Sure.
We're referencing the current season of your series. It's called this particular season is called Shutout: The Battle American Women Waged to Play Baseball, and you're referencing. This is clearly not a new phenomenon. This sort of discrimination and inability to allow girls and women to play baseball on its own terms, and it goes back, right. So the first, your episode number 6 is called A Game of Their Own, and it of all the episodes of this season, it touches probably most specifically on the various attempts, at least on the pro level, for girls/women to play professional baseball in some manner, shape, and form. My guess is that one of the things that you got drawn back into as you discovered this story, and as it started to play out, was the origins of that with the All-American Girl Professional Baseball League in the early to mid 1940s. Do you want to maybe touch upon that a little bit, and maybe some of the folks that you came into contact with from that original league that maybe opened your eyes even further?
Sure. And as a precursor to all that, I found out that women had been involved in playing baseball as far back as 1867.
That's not a surprise.
With the Vassar College team. And the women had their own barnstorming teams, and they played and were a part of the American baseball scene at least until 1909, and there was some initial discouragement that came from Albert Spalding, who declared baseball is America's sport, it's a masculine sport, and therefore women can't play. They continued to do sort of barnstorming and playing up until around the 1920s, but the emergence of men's minor league baseball sort of proliferated, and it just kind of shoved opportunities for women's baseball kind of off the stage at that point, until we get to the beginning of World War II with all the men marching off to war. Philip Wrigley, the owner of the Chicago Cubs, with a couple of other people, formed the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League to continue to keep interest in baseball. And, it went from 1943 to 1954. And everybody knows about this league because of Penny Marshall's film, A League of Their Own, which, by the way, is the most successful baseball film in the history of cinema. In any case, at that tournament that I mentioned between the Australian girls and the girls from Southern California, I met 3 former players from the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League, and they are Maybelle Blair, who was a pitcher for the Peoria Red Wings. I met Shirley Berkovich, who was a utility player who played on a number of teams, and another gal whose name escapes me at the moment, but I got to meet them there, and I decided that this is a great opportunity while I was shooting that tournament. I said, well, why don't I interview these two women who've been such a big part of baseball history, even though that film was made about them. A lot of the details aren't really well known about the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. Like, for example, a lot of people think that it sort of dried up when World War II ended, and that really isn't the case. They were just getting started. In 1944, they drew 450,000 fans, and by 1948 or so, they were drawing nearly 1 million fans, and they even had players from Cuba, because they had done spring training in Havana in 1947 and exhibition games in 1948. Interestingly enough, African Americans were not invited to be a part of the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. But some of the stories I really enjoyed hearing about, I was talking to Maybelle and Shirley, and I interviewed them together. And I asked the both of them, kind of what it was like, what was the experience, and I was going, you guys, you had to play in dresses. And Maybelle was saying, she says, I'm still picking gravel out of my side. She said, we had those strawberries like you wouldn't believe, but if you didn't wear the dresses, you didn't play. And they did have an undergarment underneath the dresses that still didn't prevent them from tearing up their thighs as they slid into the bases and so forth. And I asked them, I said, tell me about who were the best pitchers you faced. And this was great stuff, because Maybelle said there was a pitcher named Lois Florrick, and she pitched for the South Bend Blue Sox, the Kenosha Comets, and the Rockford Peaches. She threw serious heat. Maybelle said, I was terrified. You had no idea if that ball was going to be a strike, or if it was going to hit you in the head, or if you were going to get killed. But Florrick was amazing. She holds the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League's best single-season earned run average of 0.67 in 1949. She also threw the most innings that year, 269, had the best winning percentage. She was was almost 800, and she had a cumulative win-loss record of 86 and 60, a cumulative earned run average of 1.4. And in 165 games, she had 774 strikeouts. And she was a force. And then I asked Shirley the same question. I said, who was the pitcher that was the most dominant? She said, Jean Faut, F-A-U-T. And Shirley, I think she played about 4 years, and she said she threw really hard. Jean Faut played for one team, the South Bend Blue Sox, from 46 to 53. Two-time Player of the Year, regarded by many as the best overhand pitcher in the league's history. 140 wins to 64 losses, a cumulative earned run average of 1.23. And 1,780 innings pitched, 913 strikeouts. So it was amazing to hear that there were women who could throw serious gas. So
when you engage them in conversation, I mean, it seems to me, and I've seen, obviously some of the pieces in your piece, some of their interviews in your piece, there's almost like a spark or a glint in their eye, sort of not only a fond memories, right, but also how it's almost still a cause, right? It's still girls / women are just as good, if not better, at being able to play the sport of baseball, and it almost feels like it's part of an ongoing mission, not just a time in their past, right? They still it feels very alive, the whole spirit still, despite their advanced age and the memories, I guess, associated with that league back in the 40s and 50s.
Absolutely. They are tireless advocates for girls in baseball. They travel the country participating in these events. Baseball for All holds a national tournament every year, and they're sort of the lead ambassadors for that. But when they talked about their playing days, it was almost as if it was Dorothy talking about the good times she had in the land of Oz. And it was a rarefied moment in time that they got to be a part of. And so many of these girls were, they were farm girls. And this was just it was an anomaly, especially back in the 40s. Baseball has always been seen as this masculine fraternity. So for them to get an opportunity to have this league, not just for 1 year, but for almost 12 years, was pretty remarkable. And recently when Jackie Robinson had his statue unveiled at Dodger Stadium, I was there for that, as was Maybelle and Shirley. And later on that day, Maybelle and Shirley both met Sandy Koufax, who had a lot of respect for them and what they had done and what they had gone through just to play the game.
So it's also pretty interesting too, though, when you look at the history and how the league was set up, right? Obviously, a lot of it was, men going to war, and how do you keep interest in the sport up, and obviously as a distraction, just in general for the homebound folks in the States. But it's still also not necessarily the most egalitarian of setups, right? I mean, you still had codes of conduct, and you had a fight song, and there was sort of like dress requirements and need to wear lipstick at all times, and there's almost sort of this prim and proper, ladies can play, but they need to also be sort of defined and rule bound because we don't want any untoward perceptions of women on the ball field. So I'm just curious as to you get at any of that sort of, I don't want to call it a double standard, but it seems like it was, defined for them. It wasn't necessarily as, free spirited perhaps as maybe a pure equal shot at playing sports might be perceived today.
Yes, it was very regimented. Wrigley was very savvy about building a brand and putting a product on the field. And in putting that product on the field, it had to be just so. So these girls all went to charm school. Both of them talked about that. They talked about what an incredible experience it was to be able to play with all women, because most of them were, sort of tomboys, or they were, they played on boys or men's team. They were sort of the anomalies in their little their communities. And so being able to play with women for the first time was really exhilarating for them. And they went along with all of it because they realized we're getting paid to play baseball. It's good money. Maybelle said that, a scout saw her playing softball, and it's a great story because he said, I want you to come. There's going to be this professional women's baseball league. I'd like you to come try out. And she thought this guy was pulling her leg or trying to, pull a wool over her eyes. And she said, there's no way my parents are going to let me go off to some half-cocked girls' professional baseball league, which nobody's ever heard of. And she took the guy back to her house, and they explained it to him, and they all looked at him like he was green with three heads. And they said, there's no way our kid's going to go off to this thing. She said, look, we're going to pay your daughter this much money every week. And at this point, Maybelle would have been making more money than her father. And her mother said, George, crank up the car because we're packing her suitcase and she's going to go try out for this league. And so it's those types of experiences that they shared with me that were, just remarkable, especially back in that era. And I also asked them about, we know about the unwritten rules in baseball, especially when men are playing. If somebody feels like one team feels like they've been shown up, somebody's going to take a pitch to the ribs, or there's going to be trash talk and this, that, and the other thing. And I asked them, I said, did you guys get in any of that? Did you feel like people were showing you up at any point on the field, and was there retaliation? They said, there was none of that. And I've actually, in talking to women who've played the game in contemporary times, that's not part of their culture. It is a man thing. It is likely a testosterone-driven thing. But that's one of the interesting distinctions between men's and women's baseball that I have found that goes all the way back to the 1940s to today, where they're much more interested in getting on with the game and less interested in, getting after each other the way men do when they feel they've been slighted on the field of play.
Well, it does seem, at least through the memories and the on-camera interviews with Maybelle and Shirley, that they did. It seemed like they had a hell of a lot of fun. No.
Oh yeah, it was a grand old time, and they remember it all wistfully.
Okay, friends, sorry for the interruption. Just wanted to quickly remind you that today's episode of Good Seats Still Available is brought to you by our friends at Audible, the premier provider of digital audiobooks with over 180,000 titles to choose from in just about every genre you could think of. Audible titles play on iPhone, Kindle, Android, and more than 500 devices and MP3 players for listening anytime, anywhere. And for a limited time, my audience can listen to a free download of any book that they choose, as well as get a 30-day free trial when you go to audibletrial.com/goodseats. That's audibletrial.com/goodseats. And you can choose from over 180,000 titles, as we said, including one that I'm listening to right now. It's called The 10-Gallon War by John Eisenberg. That's the story of the NFL's Cowboys, the AFL's Texans, and the feud for Dallas's pro football future. Another one on my list, which I have yet to download but is on my queue, that could be interesting to our audience here, is called The National Forgotten League by Dan Daly, entertaining stories and observations from pro football's first 50 years. Those are just two of the many thousands of titles to choose from, and not just in sports history, but you name the genre that you might want to listen to, and Audible's got it. By the way, two guests perhaps that we'll have on the show, hopefully sometime soon. But again, go to audibletrial.com/goodseats for your free 30-day trial, as well as your free audiobook download to try it out for yourself. Again, that's audibletrial.com/goodseats. And now, back to our conversation. So, did you ever get into conversation with them about why it took so long after the demise of the league in the mid-1950s for women and baseball to come back together again, another 40, 50 years, until 40, 50 years later, right? It almost seems like it kind of went dark after all of that sort of excitement and exuberance. You'd think that the idea of women and baseball would be an ongoing thing based on all that success.
It was just tamped down. Again, it was reverting to the old boys network. It was baseball as a masculine fraternity. There was no real place for women. And I should say that the AAGPL, BPL, they had a barnstorming team that kept barnstorming around the United States, which I think went as long as until 1957 or 58, but a very minor blip on the radar, really. And ironically, it was because of the success of Penny Marshall's film, A League of Their Own, that interest in women and baseball kind of got generated. So what happened was, in 1994, a businessman from Atlanta struck a $3 million sponsorship deal with Coors to form a women's professional baseball team called the Colorado Silver Bullets. And essentially, this was a barnstorming team, and they operated from 1994 to 1997. And they played games against men's semi-pro teams and regional teams around the United States. And this was the first major effort of having girls play professional baseball since the All-American Girls Professional Baseball League. And the first year was a remarkable year for them. First of all, their manager was Hall of Famer Phil Niekro. And his coaches included his brother Joe, his son John, and Paul Blair and Joe Pignatano were coaches. Those guys were all former major leaguers with the exception of John Niekro. One of the players on that team was Julie Croteau, who was the first woman to play NC2A men's baseball, and that was in 1989 at St. Mary's College in Maryland. She's one of a handful of women ever to get a hit in men's NC2A baseball. And but they were overmatched. There were a lot of the players on the team obviously came out of softball. And so, and softball and baseball are very, very different sports. So consequently, their first season was not very good in terms of wins and losses. They won 6 and they lost 38. They were outscored 57-1 in their first 6 games. The team batting average over the whole season of 44 games was 154. But they got better as they went along. They had 11 wins in 95. And after starting 1996 season at 4-19, they switched to aluminum bats and won 14 of their last 30 games. They could draw people. They drew 42,000 fans at Candlestick Park in San Francisco, 33,000 in Denver, 30,000 in at Jack Murphy Stadium in San Diego, 23,000 at Memorial Coliseum in Oakland. They actually had one of their pitchers pitched a no-hitter in 94. That was Lisa Martinez. They beat the Somerville Yankees, who happened to be the champions of an over 30 amateur league in Charleston, South Carolina. The thing that was really fascinating about this no-hitter was Martinez used her underhand softball delivery to rack up 8 strikeouts. Phil Niekro said it was the most exciting damn thing I've ever seen in baseball.
That's really interesting. Before we go further in that story, because I think it's very interesting. I think it's also important to remember that I think it's a little known fact, and I'm sure we'll get into this in some future episodes. We've had a few folks that we've tried to lasso up for conversations about the AAGPBL. You said it much more quickly than I could. The actual baseball is, I want to call it a loose term for that, but that league never really played, I guess, what you would call or consider regulation baseball during its existence. Now there were some hybrid elements, I guess, of softball, especially in the earlier years. The mound and the bases were expanded a little later. The balls got smaller over time. But the Silver Bullets, though, this was pure modern day baseball from the get-go, right?
You're absolutely right. And going back to the AAGPBL, like you, I was a little surprised. I thought that they had started out with baseball when they got going, and that really didn't happen. I mean, they didn't even allow overhand pitching until 1947. The league had been in existence almost 4 years at that point. And from 47 on, they only allowed sidearm and overhand pitching. And it wasn't until 49 that the ball was reduced to 10 inches. The distance from home to the mound was lengthened to 55 feet. And it wasn't until 54, the last season, where the mound was 60 feet away, not quite 6 inches though. The base paths got 85 feet. And a lot more home runs were hit at that point. And they used a Major League Baseball, but only in that last season. But the Silver Bullets, it was 100% pure baseball from the get-go.
Do you think the movie, I'm assuming that the movie really was sort of the catalyst for the appetite or the potential appetite for a pro team, all-female baseball pursuit, no?
That is absolutely right. I think if that film doesn't happen, this opportunity doesn't occur. That was a major catalyst for it. And there was an interest and there was a hunger for it. And unfortunately, a little bit like some women's baseball projects that have occurred along the way, some of them extremely short-lived, we'll go into another one in just a little bit here, is they're sort of viewed as a novelty act. And part of the challenge with mounting a league and stocking a league with credible baseball players is they have to have the opportunity to develop their skills. And of course, girls and American women have never really had that because a wall has gone up from them participating in the game, even after they started to play Little League baseball. Even in today's game, when girls finish Little League, they're sort of automatically shuttled off into softball. So in the 90s, it was much of the same thing, where just about all of the girls who were playing on that team, or certainly most of them, they were all softball players. And it's just a different animal. The dimensions of the field, the size of the ball, the dynamic is just completely different. So it's not surprising that they struggled in terms of being able to play at a competitive level against men's teams. But the fact that they lasted 4 years was pretty interesting, and the reason it died, they felt that the sort of novelty of it all was wearing off. Coors was their sponsor, and Coors pulled the plug in 1997. And the organizers of the people who ran the league tried to continue to try and find additional funding, and it just never happened. So it all sort of fell apart. But they were playing better baseball by the time it all ended, which is, it's sort of a natural thing. The more you get to play, the better the competition, the more coaching you have. You can't, if you're an athlete that's gifted, you can't help to get better. And that's certainly what happened by the end of it all. And I think one of the amazing stories that people don't know about the Colorado Silver Bullets was their brawl in 1997. Shall I share that story?
Absolutely. I was going to ask about that next, as a matter of fact.
Well, that was their last league, and one of the fine players on the Bullets who'd been with them all 4 years was Kim Bratz, and by then she was married. Her last name was Kim Bratz Voisard. They were playing a team in Georgia. They were playing the Americas Travelers, the state champions of Georgia Rec and Park League. These were the 18 and under champions. So these apparently were boys aged 16 to 18. Where are we here in the game? Ninth inning, the Bullets are losing 10-6. And there'd been a lot of trash talk from the boys team. The catcher was just mouthing off at every hitter who came up. So there was some bad blood that was brewing. And Kim Bratz, she got nailed. She got hit by a pitch, and those girls were saying they were thrown at constantly, way more than you would typically expect, just constantly all throughout that first season. And as Kim was headed down first base, she saw the pitcher on the mound laughing at her, and she snapped. She charged the mound, both dugouts emptied, and it was a full-blown brawl. And there are all these articles in the paper. Look at these, these married 30-year-old women are beating up on these teenage boys. But it was good for attendance because I think one of their next games, which happened to be in Alaska, drew 10,000 people. But it was great to see, and I was reading, some of the women who were on that team were saying, the abuse we took, we knew we were going to get some of it, but, people were spitting on us. The invective, the verbal invective, the taunting, they said it was really quite shocking. And that's really a thread that has gone through a lot of the stories of some of the women who have continued to play the game up until now, of the abuse, not only verbal abuse, but the physical abuse. Girls told me how they'd been beaten up, they'd been assaulted. Isla Borders, one of the greatest women ever to play the game, 4 guys beat her up and attempted to rape her to discourage her from playing on her Christian college baseball team. One of those attackers was a teammate of hers. So it's pretty amazing that these kinds of things occurred just because a girl wanted to play our national pastime. And I think what made this story so compelling to me was, now you're telling me that 50% of American citizens are being discouraged from playing their national pastime because of their gender. To me, this strikes at the core of what it means to be an American. And to have this sort of mistreatment and abuse being heaped on girls and women simply because they want to play baseball, I said, this is a huge story. And certainly gender discrimination is part of American culture. It's a major problem. We're actually seeing it right now, and all the skeletons being dragged out of the closet in the entertainment industry. But I thought that this was a story that was very important. It had never been told. I said, how can this story not be told? Where are the newspaper stories? They're few and far between. What do you mean American women can't play baseball? What do you mean they have to play softball and be happy with that? I said, this is completely un-American, and why aren't more people pushed out of shape about it?
You might want to also reference one of the episodes of this season is dedicated to her story, Ida's story, right?
Isla's story, yes. One of the things that I think is really powerful in telling these types of stories, Tim, is generational connections. And so as part of the storytelling process, 3 of the 9 episodes, I wanted to focus on an individual player's journey. And so one of them was Isla Borders. And if you don't know who Isla Borders is, she's one of the most accomplished women ever to play baseball. She got the first college scholarship to play baseball. She was the first woman to notch a win in men's professional baseball since 1956. She played in the Independent League. And there were a whole bunch of other firsts associated with Isla, who was a left-handed pitcher. And she went quite far in her career. Then I looked at 2 other women. The next was Lily Jacobson, who again was one of the few women ever to play men's NC2A baseball for Vassar College. And she was a pitcher, an outfielder, and a designated hitter. She's one of the few women to get a hit in men's NC2A baseball. And she went on to have a terrific experience playing for Team USA. A lot of people don't realize that we have a national women's baseball team, and they're one of the best in the world. But she was a designated hitter for the 2006 gold-winning American baseball team. And her arc is a tremendous arc in that she starts out playing in Little League. Things get a lot harder for her as she gets into high school, a lot harder in college. And her journey is a remarkable one because her mother starts talking about when she was a sandlot player in the 1950s who could really play. She could hit the ball, she could pitch, but she wasn't allowed to play Little League baseball. She was able to see her daughter play and be her champion. And so they had sort of their own story there. And then the third generation we look at is a 10-year-old girl I found playing at the Baseball for All tournament in San Francisco, the national tournament, the national girls tournament in 2016. And she was an infielder. And, I asked her, I said, "What do you like about baseball?" She says, "It's fun. And I get to play with the boys and show them up." And, she is a pistol. And she's the only girl playing in her Pony Little League conference in Valencia, which is a suburb outside of Los Angeles here. And she plays with a lot of grit, a lot of heart and determination. So interwoven in this story of the journey American women have taken in trying to participate in baseball, not just playing, but coaching and umpiring, we have these sort of stops along the way to experience these journeys and adventures these 3 different women from 3 different generations have experienced. And it really touched me, everything that they've gone through. And what really struck me was especially Isla and Lily, was the emotional and psychological and physical trauma they went through to play. And one observation I'd heard from women players was that the worst verbal abuse came from women in the stands versus men.
Why was that?
It's kind of heartbreaking. I think it kind of goes back to the social constructs we have in our culture, whereas women have traditionally been seen as a sort of mothers and raising children, and this business of being out on the field of play, even though women's sports is very much a going concern. It's still, I think, very much seen as an anomaly. Even people in the media, if there's a girl who's a really good pitcher, they'll say, "Wow," they sort of treat her like she's a freak of nature. When, anybody who has some athletic ability, the more chances they get to improve as a player, they're going to do that, regardless of gender. It's sort of like saying, "Wow, look at this woman firefighter. She can really put out that fire." And we sort of, and along the way, we met and interviewed a woman umpire named Perry Barber, and and she shared her journey that we've got that mixed into our season 3 of what she had to go through just to become an umpire in Little League and kind of moving her way up through the ranks, and she's been umpiring since 1981. But they all tell the same story of having to fight this gender bias to participate in playing baseball. And it still isn't any easier for them all because Title IX is that requirement is satisfied in high school and college by the provision of baseball. And no school is going to offer both baseball and softball because of the budgetary constraints that they've got. So there's a real conundrum in trying to solve this problem. How are girls going to get on the field and become better baseball players beyond Little League if they don't get the chance to play baseball in high school and in college?
Well, there's also something to be said about, and we've seen this certainly with basketball, certainly soccer of late. There is no, or was no, or is no professional league to which women can aspire to. So in some respects, that's also sort of a double negative or a double whammy, right? Because it's like, well, why continue with this, if there's really no logical conclusion, especially if I'm any good at it, right? And it seems like the last attempt was in the wake of the success that the Silver Bullets had, which was this year and maybe a half attempt with what was first called Ladies League Baseball in 1997 and then renamed and reconstituted as the Ladies Professional Baseball League in 1998. I think you've also spoken to a few of the players from that era as well. And I guess the idea is, right, as to pick up on sort of your last thread, it's one thing to sort of play with the men, I guess, and have a sort of be saddled with this whole idea that, you can't, it's hard to play against men when you've had very little opportunity to develop your game in the lead up to, playing professionally against men. I guess the logic would be, well, okay, how about a league that women can actually play in and then aspire to, and over time perhaps get to some level of equality on their own merits?
Sure, and it's worth noting, Tim, that there is a professional women's baseball league in Japan, and that's been going since 2007. There's only 4 teams, but that's a very spirited league, and they do well. But to get back to the Ladies League Baseball, this was a league that was primarily in California. It also involved a team in Arizona, and there were 5 teams. And again, this was a league of their own, kind of helped get this going too. They had 5 teams. They were the San Jose Spitfires, the San Francisco Bay Sox, the Long Beach Aces, the Phoenix Peppers, and the Los Angeles Legends. And they had one full season, 97, and the San Jose Spitfires defeated the Legends. And Janelle Freese of the Legends won that league's version of the Cy Young Award. And 2 of the members of the San Jose Spitfires are interviewed in our season 3 of the Sweet Spot, the Shutout, the battle American women waged to play baseball. And they are Rochelle Rocky Henley. Rocky also played on the 1994 Colorado Silver Bullets team. And then the team's catcher, who is a really a very special player by the name of Alex Sickinger. The thing that was amazing about Alex was, she grew up playing softball with girls, and when she went to high school, softball wasn't offered. So she wanted to play baseball, so she tried out for the men's team, made the team as their starting second baseman, and then ultimately displaced the starting catcher. So, and she went on to, win all these all-league honors in high school playing against boys. So she was asked to play for the Spitfires, and at age 17, she was named Rookie of the Year. She was also the Defensive Player of the Year, and she went on to be the catcher for the U.S. Women's National Team in 2003 and 2004, and of the 04 squad, winning gold at the Women's World Cup of Baseball in Canada. And the nice thing about this story kind of ties together is that Alex and Rocky have both helped to start the San Francisco Rec and Parks San Francisco Bay Sox All-Girls Baseball League for girls age 8 to 16 in the San Francisco Bay Area, which has really become kind of a pilot program for other cities to emulate, to allow girls to play baseball and play with other girls. And it goes on up in through high school. And because we have this institution of softball, the only other way girls can get better at playing is to be able to play in these types of community leagues. So it's very much kind of a grassroots effort and sort of solution to be able to provide these opportunities for girls and women to get better at the game. And by getting better at the game, they'll be able to make the teams in high school and compete to make the teams in college. But just being good enough and with sports being a meritocracy, meaning the best players take the field, there's still a big uphill climb because not all coaches. Let's face it, it's a game that's administered by men, it's umpired by men, it's coached by men, and a lot of times those men's coaches in high school don't want to see a girl take a position on that field from a boy that has a better chance of getting a scholarship to play baseball in college than she would. So there's that sort of conundrum.
But it does still feel, though, right? Even in the wake of this, the Ladies Professional Baseball League in the middle of the season in 1998, it does seem that not these professional exploits dating back to the World War II era don't seem to be, and I think maybe hopefully coming out of your series here, don't seem to be in vain, right? It seems like it almost feels more than just grassroots. It feels like there is something much more substantial in the offing for the idea of women and baseball going forward, no?
I think so. And, the AAGPPL, all that stuff, this is, these are the seeds in the garden. And all the wonderful plants began growing. And like any other garden, the plants won't grow unless you nurture them and you water them. And I think we're finally in a place now where that garden will continue to be watered. We have some great examples of that. Every year, Baseball for All has that tournament in the summer, and it's now taking place at Bayer Stadium in the Midwest where the Rockford Peaches played. So you've got that historical tie from the AAGPBL to today, and you have women who used to play in that league out there exhorting the girls of today to play. And the last tournament they had this year, it drew more girls from North America to play in an all-girls baseball tournament in the history of baseball, which is, that's very, very significant. Additionally, we all know about these fantasy camps that Major League Baseball teams run. Well, for a long time, the Yankees were the only fantasy camp to have a camp exclusive for women. But now the Boston Red Sox started that a couple years ago, and we touch on that. That's also in our episode 6, A Game of Their Own. We touch on that experience and what it meant to those women. They're getting instruction from Rico Petrocelli and Butch Hobson, and all of these men who come into contact with women for the first time playing baseball. They're all struck by their passion and love for the game. And let's face it, fantasy campers, you've got people who are on up into their 70s. So it really runs the gamut, and baseball knows no boundaries when it comes to age or gender. So we're starting to see more of these types of opportunities and experiences open up for American girls and women. And it should be noted that up in Canada, I worked with Andre Lachance to get some images and information about their program. They very much encourage and promote girls to play baseball all through Little League and in high school, and they mix genders. And in some cases in high school and in playoff games and championships games, all girls teams are playing all boys teams, and they don't have a second thought about it. And Andre was asking me, what's wrong with you Americans? Why are you treating your women like this? So this is very much an American problem.
I guess my last question is, of all the people that you talked to in putting this season together, did any of them feel like there were enough foundational elements to take another shot at another professional league for women for baseball?
I think there's hope. There are hopes and dreams. These are the baby steps that is the first steps of the long march to be able to develop enough talent to stock a professional league. And, the reason we have the WNBA is because women have been able to play college basketball since the 1970s. So it's going to take a while for that to happen. But yes, you can see that dream, the sort of light at the end of the tunnel in the eyes of these people, especially the ones who've been chasing this dream for a long time. But I think the most important thing to a lot of these people is, just give us a chance to play the game that we love. That's all we're asking. And it kind of starts and ends there.
All right, there it is. Very intriguing discussion with Jon Leonoudakis. Thank you, Jon, for being part of our little journey into the realm of forgotten sports. And let us get all the promotional goodness for Jon underlined here for you to follow through on as listeners. Let's see. Season 3 of The Sweet Spot, a Treasury of Baseball Stories, which is called Shutout, the battle American women wage to play baseball. It is available now as a streaming channel for you to find on Roku. You will find it on Vimeo On Demand. And if you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you will find it on Amazon Prime. I also want to call attention to a number of other works that Jon has done, especially in the realm of baseball. Haino, A Century in the Bleachers from 2015 is well worth your seeking out. It's a documentary about a long-time, many decades sports writer and his coverage of the sport of baseball. Not Exactly Cooperstown, another video/DVD from 2012, which is, I would argue, is kind of a parallel, but in a more wacky and fun-filled and adventurous way to that of baseball's Hall of Fame, from the things that didn't quite make the Hall of Fame, shall we say, but are exceedingly notable in the history of baseball nonetheless. The 2013 documentary from Jon Leonoudakis called The Day the World Series Stopped. That is also available as a streaming download as well as a DVD. We're going to have links to all of these, by the way, on our episode number 38 with Jon on our website at goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just look for this episode and you will find links to all of those things. And you also, two other things I got to tell you about Jon, because he's an interesting cat. He was also very much involved in the production of a phenomenal documentary, not related to sports, but in the realm of music, and it's called The Wrecking Crew. And if you have not seen this documentary, which came out, I believe, in 2007, hit the film festival market then and came out just thereafter. This is an amazing story. The Wrecking Crew is of the musicians, the studio musicians in Los Angeles that were literally the backing band for some of the most memorable recordings and artists of our generation, of a generation prior as well. We're talking about Elvis and Sinatra and Richie Valens and Herb Alpert and the Mamas and the Papas and Dean Martin and Sammy Davis, the Fifth Dimension, the Byrds. I mean, you name them, the Wrecking Crew was part of it. And shining the spotlight on some of the famous or not so famous studio musicians behind some of those most famous songs and legendary artists of our day. Again, that's called The Wrecking Crew. That is available as well wherever good DVDs and or streaming downloads are found. Last thing is Jon Leonoudakis also, I don't know if we mentioned it in the episode, but was also instrumental in creating the theme attraction at Walt Disney World called Monsters, Inc. Laugh Floor. And if you have kids and you've been there, you will know that is a fun and interactive experience where jokes are told in a very interactive way around the whole Monsters, Inc. franchise. And Jon was the brains and the production around that, along with the Disney Imagineering crew. So a lot of things to follow up with our guest, Jon Leonoudakis. And we encourage you to partake of those early and often. And we do thank Jon for being part of our little episodes here, and we thank you for giving us a listen. Again, for our promotional purposes, go to goodseatsstillavailable.com. You will find all of our current and previous episodes, and as well as links to all the various media that our guests have discussed and talked about and promoted. Please visit there early and often. And you will find us also, of course, on social media. It's Good Seats Still Available on Instagram. On Twitter, you will find us at Good Seats Still. Like us, if you will, on Facebook. And I can't think of any other thing, but thanks for all your social promotional shout-outs and thumbs up and all that stuff. We love it. We love you, and we thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week here on Good Seats Still Available. Thanks for listening.